And she stood there, waiting, watching. One by one they got off the ship. No, that's not him. No, that's not him either. Where is he? And in order to really look at this, you'd need to say he committed a crime. But he didn't. And they were like the mafia. Really underhand. He was part of that. But he wasn't. And maybe he had a life that you didn't know about, but he didn't. But I saw him get on, and a policeman had to tear them apart, and there is no record of that application. A story full of strange goings on, and a man at the centre who the world almost entirely forgot. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Well, well, well. Bloody lovely to be back recording. How are you doing out there? I hope you're okay. Thank you to those who've been in touch. I've been keeping up with the goings on of the Facebook group and the Instagram, etc. So yeah, thanks for getting in touch. Thanks for your messages, and thanks to those who keep posting marvelous, wonderful things in the Facebook community. That's really nice. So yeah, it's been a little while. I was washing my hair and I just lost track of time. Okay, are you ready for a story? Okay, let's go. All right, well, there are lots of well-known Louis in this world. There is, well, first one that comes to my mind, Louis Armstrong, of "We Have All the Time in the World" fame. There's him. There is Louis Theroux from journalism and interviewing people. There's this one who I'm not really sure I know who this guy is. He's called something like Louis D.B. Major or something. Do you know who I mean? I think he was like some sort of Hollywood producer. I've just got this image of like a big, huge, fat guy with a cigar who made people famous and was a bit underhand or something. Anyway, so those are the three Louis I can think of. But there's one that you may never have heard of, but you should have. For what he did for the world, as we know it now, is just incredible. Some of you might know the story of Louis Le Prince, and perhaps some not. So even if you do, settle down, settle back, settle yourself, and relax as I tell you the story of Louis Le Prince. So, the moving image, the motion picture, the talkies, the flicks, the cinema, the many, many, many apps that you have on your phone. You've got your Instagrams, you've got your TikToks, your Facebooks, etc. Now, when we think of the invention of the motion picture, which I'll be completely honest, I didn't think of it before I started looking at this story. But if you did think of it, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was the work of a Mr. Thomas Edison. Yeah, that guy. The guy who basically invented everything. Everything. Everything you know, he invented. Thomas Edison, famed with inventing, well, I was going to say electricity, but he didn't invent that. The light bulb, I think he invented. Sort of sound recordings. I mean, like I am podcasting right now. Thomas Edison played a part in that. Yeah, millions and millions of things. But before we get into who invented what and whose lives were dramatically altered in the process, let's take a little second to look at where we are and what time it is. So, it is 1841, and Louis Le Prince is born in Metz, France, to a middle-class family. So, his dad was in the army, and his mum, well, there's not an awful lot of information out there about his mum. Although she does play a part in the story later, there's not a great deal of information about her. I think Louis's mum, was at home when Louis was young. So, from a young age, Louis was really into art and making things, painting, drawing, all sorts of artistic-y things. But photographs were his real interest. At a very young age, he became fascinated by photographs. I can kind of understand, like, this time period, right? 1841. I suppose what I was thinking is, outside of a photograph, when else did you see yourself? I mean, really, apart from maybe, an oil painting or maybe looking in a mirror, when else did you see your own image? I don't know. But photography had been around for a few years. Well, actually, this gets heavily debated. People say photography had actually been around since like 1820. It had been around for a long time, but it just had never really gotten a name for it, but people kind of knew what it was. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter. What we know is that Louis was very into it when he was young. He had another passion, which was science. So he was really into sciencey stuff, especially chemistry. So those were his two kind of fascinations when he was young. Do you know, honestly, sometimes when I'm researching these stories, I'm like, oh, cool, right, yeah. 10 years old, he's like really into like photography and science and inventions. At 10 years old, I was literally recording Madonna and Kylie dance routines off of Top of the Pops and learning them. That was what I was doing when I was 10. But yeah, cool. Yeah, science, photography, yeah, whatever. So, he expresses this real passion for it to his mum and dad, and they're really, really into him sort of getting into this world of photography. And, well, this is bloody lucky. His dad happens to be friends with a Mr. Louis Degueur. Degueur, we'll call him. He is the father of photography. He is the man who is named as the person who invented it. And it just so happens that Louis Le Prince's dad is friends with him. Isn't that lucky? You can be like, here, I'm going to send you round to see my pal Louis, who happened to invent the thing that you are very interested in. So that's pretty good. So he goes, he gets some sort of more of an understanding of what photography is all about. Up into his teenage years, he paints, he continues to read science, particularly chemistry. So this is kind of who Louis is. Now, growing up, he has a brother called Albert, and the two of them, they're quite different. Albert's not into anything artistic. Albert is into collecting things and money at a young age. He eventually goes on to become quite a successful merchant of the time. He owns a few different businesses later in his life. Albert will come back in our story. So, Louis's mother has a real belief that her son is onto something with this science and art and his real passion for it. So she pays for him to go and study in Germany at university. And this is much to the annoyance of Albert, who believes that their mother favours Louis and that she lavishes money on him for all his artistic projects while he doesn't really see much money come his way. And to be frank, it's not like the Louis Le Prince family were loaded. They didn't have loads and loads of money. I mean, they really weren't rich. But whatever money they had went on him going to Germany to follow his passions. So off he goes. His sort of, I think it was about 19, 18, 19, something like that. Off he goes to Germany, gets himself some schnitzel, some Birkenstocks, and he goes to university and he really starts to study photography. And it's whilst at university that he meets a man called John Whitsley. And John is an Englishman who is an artist, and John has a sister called Lizzie. And when Louis meets Lizzie, the two of them, they share both a passion for photography, but a passion also for each other. So, very quickly, they become a couple. Straight away, they both just share this love of photography and art, and yeah, they fall in love, and before you know it, in Germany, Lizzie falls pregnant with the very first of the Le Prince children. And this is great. Her and Louis are very, very happy. They really are. They're loving their life in Germany. They've got their first child. Everything's great. Now, Mr. John Whitley, Lizzie's brother, he comes to them with a proposal. He says he wants them to move to England. And what he wants them to do is set up a college, a technical college for people to study photography. Now, Lizzie and Louis, they think about this. It would mean uprooting their family from Germany, moving to England, but they like the idea of setting up this college, so they agree. And off they go to Leeds, which is in Yorkshire, England. Now, Leeds, if you don't know it, if you're not from the UK, Leeds is a major city in England. It's about, I think it's about 100 miles outside of London. And it's really known for, well, it's known for lots of things, but it's known for its universities. It's got a really great sort of education system. It's got a really thriving nightlife these days. Loads of architecture, football, and a lot of music comes out of Leeds. The Arctic Monkeys, that's where they come from. Of, I'll bet that you look good on the dance floor, don't know what you're looking for romance for, all that. Yeah, that's them. And so, Lizzie and Louis, they set up the Leeds Technical School of Art, and they focus on photography. Now, they start to get experimental with their photography. They start doing these experiments in size of photographs, so they can try to make really big ones, and colour photography. So they're trying a lot of these kind of things. They're quite the powerhouse of this college and of the experiments that they're doing. So much so that Queen Victoria is so taken with some of their colour photographs that she commissions some photographs to be done. What they are photographs of, I don't know. Probably, I would guess, her husband Albert, because she was pure obsessed with Albert. So anyway, you get the picture. Louis, Lizzie, smashing it. They're absolutely smashing it. Now it's round about this time that Louis starts thinking, what else can be done with photographs? How could you move this on? How could we move on as a world from just photographs? And let's be clear, at the time, there are lots of inventors in the world all trying to come up with new technology, with new things to advance. Now, Thomas Edison, being about the world's best known inventor, is working at a rate of knots to try and advance everything at this time so that he can be the main inventor of many, many things. So if you wanted to work on something, if you wanted to experiment with a new technology, you had to do it quickly and you had to do it secretively. And I mean really secrety. Secrety? That's not a word. And I mean really secretively. The world of invention and inventors, honestly, it's like the bloody mafia. People used spies, they used all sorts of underhand tricks and dirty schemes to beat each other to be the first to invent things, and Thomas Edison was gathering a reputation for some very shifty tactics. I think this is just mental, right? So Thomas Edison had a deal with the patent office, the place where, I'm sure you know what a patent office is, but basically it's the place that you go when you've invented something that says, I want my name put on this. I don't want anyone else to steal it. So he's got this deal with the patent office that he has like a list of things that are not yet invented, but he wants his name put to them so that when they are invented, he can be credited as the person who did them. So it's things that he knows will come in the future, but he hasn't quite got there yet, but he knows that it's being worked on elsewhere. So he's going to put his name down so that he's got the name next to it, and he will basically race to try and get there first. I mean, honestly, that's mad. What the hell? We're talking, what, 1880 at this point. He probably had a list that was like, the iPhone 5. Do you know what I mean? iPods. Things like that just weren't around at this point. But he was so convinced that he would get there. He was cutthroat. I mean, he was deadly in his ambition to be the first person to do these things. The patent office, I mean, that is where I should have gone when I basically invented true crime podcasting. But I forgot to go. And then everyone else started doing it, and I was like, oh shit, I'm pretty sure I invented that. And then I forgot to do anything about it. Or, this is the other one. I might have said this before on the podcast, but I'll say it again because it's worth noting. Have you ever seen the film American Beauty? Right. So, you know, in the opening scene of that film, there's this like plastic bag and it's like floating and everyone's like, oh, it's a metaphor for life and all this sort of thing. Right. I came up with that. That was my idea. Yeah, I invented that. Now, I don't know how the director, who directed American Beauty? Oh, let's say it was Steven Spielberg, right? It was probably him. I don't know how Steven Spielberg got into my head and stole that idea, but he did. So, there you go. There's just an example of two things I forgot to patent. So, somewhere around 1881, Louis starts looking with real interest at huge paintings. And I'm talking about, do you know, like the kind of paintings that fill a whole room? You know, like when you walk into like maybe like a gallery and it's those ones that stretch the entire wall. Sometimes they go up into the ceilings and they have got all these different kind of figures in them, and they tell a story. I mean, I say they tell a story. It's generally half naked people eating apples and some trees. You know, it's not great storytelling, but anyway, that's what it is. So he's looking at these with real fascination because he's thinking, if I walk from one end of the wall to the other, I do get a story. Now, how could you basically somehow put these all together and have them moving so that they tell a moving story? So this is where this idea of a moving photograph comes to him. And he shares this idea with his wife Lizzie, and she gets really excited because this is something new. This is brand new. Now, at this time, as this idea is working in his head, the man who brought them to Leeds, John Whitley, he asks them to leave Leeds and go to New York. Now, this would be another move for the couple, but he says in New York there are lots of people who are experimenting with photography. They're trying lots of new, really cool things. Would you go and, teach a few classes, do a few things, see who you can connect with? And so they agree. So it's in New York when he gets there that he really wants to take this idea of the moving photograph forward. But he says to Lizzie, look, if I'm going to do this, I need complete secrecy. Nobody can know that I'm doing this. He locks himself away. What he does is he rents a small basement flat down a street somewhere where no one's going to find him, and he gets to work, and no one is to know that he's here. Now, I am no scientist, believe me. I mean, I could try a science experiment, but it wouldn't go very well. Neither am I a photographer, believe me. So I'm not really entirely 100% sure how Louis goes about this process of making the moving photograph, but this is kind of what I've got from it. He works out that you would need 16 different lenses, and that there's something to do with the human eye needs to see 16 things in quick succession to make it look like it's moving. So this is kind of what he plays around with, and he builds, you can see images of this online, he builds a sort of wooden box that's got all these different kind of lenses on it. And yeah, basically this is the first moving camera. This is the first camera that's gonna capture the people actually moving and not just photographs. I mean, what he makes kind of looks like if you said to me, here's some wood, here's some nails and some lenses, go daft. You know what I mean? It looks like a kid's art project, but hey, it gets the job done. So this is months of solitary work. And as this is happening, Lizzie is on her own in New York raising the kids. But here he has actually done it. He's actually created the world's first motion picture camera. And this is amazing. And now he has to test it. So what he does is he travels back to Leeds to tell John Whitley this. And there he shows John the invention. And John is blown away. He's like, WTF, man. It's 1889, and you've produced something the world has never seen. And it's while he's in Leeds that he shoots the very first ever film. He stands on a bridge in the centre of Leeds and he overlooks the traffic and he records it for about 5 seconds. So he gets really excited because here is the first piece of film. And then from there he films something, and you can find these all online. He films something called the Roundhay Garden Scene. It's John Whitley and John's wife and a few other people, and they're dancing in a garden. And that is now considered, because of its length, I think it's about a minute long, that's considered the first ever real piece of film to exist in the world. The traffic was maybe more like a test. This is the first real piece of film. Now, it's reported that on that day, when he filmed those people dancing in the garden, Louis Le Prince sat back and he said, "One day, this technology will be used for things we can't even imagine. This will change the world as we know it. It will capture the most incredible world events, and the most important things that will ever happen will be captured on film." He said there will be a moment so breathtaking that the world will never recover, and it will be the moment when, with this technology, we capture Olivia Newton-John turning to the camera and saying, "Tell me about it, stud." Yep. That's what he said. That is definitely reported as what he said. So he writes to Lizzie and he lets her know in a sort of code, really, what has happened, that he's been able to achieve this. And back home, Lizzie is frantically trying to build what would essentially be the world's first projector, because now they have to find a way that they can actually show the film recordings that he's making. So another thing that he has to do is he obviously has to get to the patent office before anyone else does, because he wants his name on this. Here's his first problem. He gets there and they say to him, "It's going to be weeks before we can log this." He asks why. They get shifty. They tell him just because. Now at this time, nobody outside of Lizzie and John Whitley know about this invention. So he says, okay, so he has to go away. He leaves his name, but he says, I'll be back really soon, because in his mind, what he's going to do is premiere this in New York, and he wants the recognition that he thinks he deserves, and he does deserve it. But they're being awfully suspicious. So, anyway, he's heading back to New York, and on his way, he gets a letter from his brother Albert asking him to come to France. Remember, in those days, everyone went everywhere by boat, so it took donkey's years to get anywhere. So, it's a bit of a pain to have to go from Leeds to France, from France to New York, but he thinks, right, okay, well, I'll do it. So he sets sail for Gay Paris, sets out to see where his brother Albert lives, which is in Dijon. Yes, the place where they make the mustard. So, okay, I'm going to stop there for a second, because that is the story of how the camera came to be. That's the journey of the invention so far. But there is other things that I have to fill you in on before we pick back up at the point where he has just arrived at Dijon Mustard. As I said before, the Le Prince family were by no means wealthy. What little money they had was disappearing fast because basically Louis had stopped working to invent this camera. And back home in New York, Lizzie was frantic with worry about the family's finances. There was just no money coming in, and they had these two little kids. And, on top of that, things were difficult for her because she hadn't seen her husband in months while he was away working on the camera. He was utterly focused on the invention, and it had really taken him away. Now, the reason that they had been able to afford for him to be able to do that, and the boat trips back and forth from New York, Leeds, etc., was because Louis's mother was paying for it. In the way that Mrs. Le Prince had funded him when he was young, she was still doing it when he was an adult. However, she had died a year before and the money was drying up. So that was difficult. The few people who had seen Louis over the time that he was inventing had reported to each other and to Lizzie that he wasn't quite himself. Something was different. He seemed frustrated. He seemed constantly worried. Now, that's understandable. He is literally in a race against Thomas Edison to create something that's going to change the world. But they don't necessarily know that's what he's working on. They just know there's something different in him. While he is away in Leeds, Lizzie's at home in New York, and there's a series of strange male visitors to the house. Lizzie didn't know who any of these people were, and when the first man arrives, a man called Mr. Rose, he arrives one day asking to speak to Louis, and Lizzie says he isn't here. But this man is insistent that actually Louis is here and that Lizzie is hiding him in the house. And Lizzie is really taken by this, and she's really confused as to who this man is. A few weeks later, he returns in a disguise as a salesman, basically insisting that he sees Louis. And again, Lizzie is like, Louis isn't here. Now, she's not lying. Louis is, in a basement working on this invention. He's not at home, but this man is insistent that he is. And who was this man? When Lizzie asks her friends to help her figure it out, she gets met with some strange silences, and she's not really able to sort of make sense of this. One of her friends eventually confides in her that there's been rumours swirling for a while now that Louis might have another side to him, one that Lizzie didn't know about. In a nutshell, there were rumours that Louis had a secret Grindr account, that he was a fan of male company. Now, Lizzie just thinks this is ridiculous and she shrugs this off. She believes that the man who's coming to the door is definitely something to do with the camera. And it's at this point she starts thinking that her mail is being intercepted and that spies are after her communications with her husband, just in case it's got any details about the camera. So, that's a bit of context I wanted to give you just before we pick up in Dijon with Louis and his brother. So from the minute that Louis and Albert meet, I can't decide if Albert is called Albert or Albert, but whichever I call him, I'm talking about the same guy. From the minute they meet, it is heated. Both brothers argue loudly in public about their dislike of each other, their absolute hatred of each other, how self-centered each of them are, And the root of this is that when Louis's mum died, she left all of her money to Louis. Nothing for Albert. Absolutely nothing. Now that's money Louis desperately needs, but Albert is refusing to hand it over. He collected the will and he says Louis has been spoiled his whole life, and that in their mother's death he doesn't see why the money should go to him. There's witnesses at the time who say that the argument between them was so fierce they were asked to leave a restaurant. The argument carried on out into the street and they had to be separated by a policeman. Eventually, Louis leaves the argument as he has to catch a train back to Paris in order to get home to New York. And at the end of the day, yes, he needs this money, but getting home is all he wants. He wants to get back and he wants to start public conversations about this incredible thing that he has made. And he wants to start, obviously, conversations about how one day they will make the iconic piece of cinema Legally Blonde. That is what he cares about. So Albert begrudgingly goes with him to the train station, and they're still fighting as Louis gets on the train. That is the last time that Louis Le Prince will ever be seen. Boarding that train from Dijon to Paris, he gets on in Dijon, he never arrives in Paris. He's listed as a passenger on the train, and he's counted by the guard as it leaves Dijon. But at the other end, as the passengers get off the train, there is someone missing. Louis Le Prince. Where's he gone? So, in New York, Lizzie is waiting at the dock for the ship arriving from Paris. She's really excited to see her big gay husband get off the boat. But the ship arrives, the ship empties, and Louis doesn't emerge. Now she thinks, that's weird. And she has to sort of explain to the kids, their father must have gotten a later arriving ship, and surely he would be here the following day, if not the day after that. So the following days come, she goes back to the docks, and the next ship from Paris comes in. No sign of Louis. And now she's beginning to panic. Just at this time when everything is so secretive and he's just on the verge of something so exciting, he is late. Very, very late. So she writes to Albert. He replies saying that he put Louis on the train and he's no idea why he wouldn't have made the ship home. Call it intuition. Call it what you like, but Lizzie knows something is up. She makes contact with the police, who are very unhelpful. They say, well, he might have just decided to run. And she explains, well, no, that's not really my husband's style. That would be really, really odd. And they say, well, look, plenty of people just disappear. They just walk out of their life. And she says, no, that's not right. She tries explaining to police that her husband is on the cusp of a really exciting invention and it's a dangerous time. They say, yeah, everyone's inventing something right now. I'm not really sure there's much that we can do. So Lizzie takes it a bit further. She tries to give him a kind of explanation of what it is that he is working on to try and sort of amp up their interest in looking for him, and it doesn't really work. They kind of roll their eyes like, yeah, look, everyone is into inventing. Let's just not get carried away. I'm pretty sure a lot of great inventors have to go through that. I'm pretty sure, like, the person that invented the wheel was probably like, you are never going to believe this. You are never going to believe this, folks. Guess what I've invented? It's a big circle. And everyone's like, yeah, yeah, whatever. Or like when Madonna invented pop music, people were like, yeah, yeah, calm down. It won't be that big. Anyway, not giving up, Lizzie does the following. She gets the ship's records of people who have travelled from Paris to New York. Now, here's the weird thing. His name appears on the ship's log. So he was logged as being on the ship. So she takes this down to the docks. She gets the people who were working on the ship that he should have been on, shows them what he looks like, and they say, nah, don't recognise him. Don't think he was on this ship. Do not know who this man is. So she writes to Albert again. She tells him how serious she now thinks this is. She writes to the patent office and she asks for progress on her husband's application, to which they say, there is no application from your husband. We've never heard of him. Around this time, Mr. Rose makes another visit to her home, and this time Lizzie is ready for him. She's like, who are you really? And when she starts questioning him, he runs away. Now Albert, for all that him and Louis fought like cat and dog, he pays out of his own money for a huge search operation. France, Paris, Leeds, Germany, New York, back to Paris. I mean, he is literally, you know that song, from Paris to Berlin, and every disco I get in, my heart is pumping for love. He is literally from Paris to Berlin, looking for Louis, all to no avail. No sign of him turns up. 6 months after Louis Le Prince's disappearance, Thomas Edison launches for the world the first ever motion picture camera, made from 16 single lenses working together to create a moving film. Lizzie begins to give up hope of ever finding her husband. After a full year, she goes back to police and she says, look, it's now been a year. Can you please start searching for him? And they say, look, we've got a little bit more info now that we understand Mr. Edison's invention and that your husband was somewhat involved. Okay, there's maybe sort of reason for us to look, but we need something more concrete. Can you accuse your husband of something? And then that way he becomes a criminal and we have to look for him. Lizzie's like, I've never heard anything more ridiculous. What are you talking about? He's missing. And they say, nah, if you say that he deserted you, that he stole something, then he becomes a criminal and we can actually look for him. So she's forced to say that he stole money from the family, which is ridiculous because there was no money to steal. So a police search begins. Like I say, it is a full year later now, and it turns up very, very little. At one point, a male body is dragged out of a French river, and it does look a bit like Louis, but on closer inspection, it's not him. So the theories. What are they? Well, there's a few. I think they're all plausible, and they're all kind of not plausible all at the same time. It's hard to say, so why don't you pick the one that you like the most? The first theory is that he was secretly a gay man and that he staged this whole thing to run off with his lover. He somehow met his lover on the train, they escaped from it, and they went on to live in a lovely French chateau, making wine, eating cheese, wearing berets and watching Amelie. Obviously the last bit's made up, but you get the picture. Is this possible? Yeah, but is it realistic? I don't know. The suicide theory. The idea that basically he was so worried that he'd left his family really stuck financially and that he would never see the money his mother had left. And so, with that, he took his life. Now, who knows where, who knows how, but it means he would have had to have gotten off that train, but he didn't. The theory being, with the suicide one, that he was thinking, well, if I am not here, Albert will be forced to give the money to Lizzie. Third theory, the Thomas Edison wiped him out one. Well, this one is the most popular, and I don't want to slander the good name of Thomas Edison, but apparently at the time it really was crazy in the world of inventing, and people were into all sorts of shady behaviour and they didn't like to be beaten to things. I mean, is it possible that some sort of Agatha Christie murder on a train body disposal thing happened? Maybe. I mean, like I say, it was honestly the world of the mafia at that time. And the fourth theory is his brother did it. As the person who claims to have put him on that train, saw him last, they were arguing so loudly it had to be ripped apart by a policeman. Was it Albert stroke Albert? I can't decide what his name is. He was the prime suspect for a long time, and police questioned him, but then they decided he had nothing to do with it. So which of those do you think it is? I'm going to say, honestly, I don't have a clue. I think they're all possible, and then I just don't know. When I first started looking at the story, I was like, I really think it was the brother. But this idea that he spent so much of his own money to have people travel everywhere looking for Louis, I don't know, says to me, I'm not really sure it was him. I don't know, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Whatever happened, whatever went down, how Louis Le Prince vanished, we will never know, because to this day, not a single belonging or sighting or body has ever turned up. He would, years later, get recognition for his invention, but not really in the way that he and Lizzie had imagined. More sort of small pieces written saying that basically he'd laid the groundwork for other great inventors. Now he's been crowned the father of cinematography, which seems fitting. But we will never know how it's possible that this incredible inventor stepped on a train only to never step off it. And so ends the story. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I've got a real thing at the moment about like people who do things and don't get the recognition for them. Yeah, I'm really into this. So, well, it's been lovely to be back. And if you liked it, let me know. If you didn't, keep it to yourself. I don't really care. If you've got a spare second, then you can follow Extraordinary Stories Podcast on Instagram. You can join the Facebook group. It's a marvellous, wonderful community. Come on in. You can, if you want, leave a review on Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. 5 stars is probably best, because I was reading last week that actually if you, for Extraordinary Stories Podcast, if you try and leave anything under a 5-star review, you get a virus on your computer. So it's probably easier just to leave 5 stars, isn't it? And yeah, final sort of piece of advice. If you are currently inventing something, then for goodness sakes, don't get on a train. Okay? Goodbye.
Eden It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over. Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.